So Libero, yeah, I mean, a lot of people would think of the position and all that. What I most think of with the word Libero is after the 1999 Champions League final, when Stefan Effenberg hammered Lothar Matthäus and said he was even playing a Libero, the easiest position to play. Is that some sort of message, a metaphor for this point?
Well, that's the thing, isn't it? It's hard to play well, easy to just do. That's the kind of life lesson of a libero, isn't it?
Yeah.
Stefan Effenberg famously banned for swearing at the 1994 World Cup. 6 years.
He took his finger up, didn't he? He flipped the word
to the German fans.
Yeah.
I mean, he's one of those German players from the kind of pre-modern age, isn't he? When they were just horrible and angry and good at winning before academies ruined them. Before they were brainwashed, like Danilo, into playing systems football. Brainwashed, but in a good way, so that I thought like everyone else. Did you read those comments this week? An extraordinary interview from the lad.
That was Cancelo, was it?
No, Danilo.
Danilo.
Oh, Danilo, sorry, yeah.
Yeah, he spoke about the way his individuality was removed from him, and he was convinced that he should be part of a group rather than having his own thoughts. And this was good and had made him much better at life.
That is a big current theme of the game, though, isn't it? I mean, suddenly we've got like your Iriolas spinning away from that. They want to bring more individualism back, that collectivism has gone too far. Let's rather than just play the ball inside, have a go at fullback.
But it's interesting how that ostensible opposition between positionism and relationism, I mean, free expression and just do what we've drilled, is also co-opted into a system. So that's my system, is that you have freedom. But like, how far does that system go? And if it's freedom within the system, is it really free? I mean, sometimes freedom's just another word for not being able to shoot from 40 yards out, isn't it? What would Stefan Effenberg think?
Well,
he would have taken out his pack of cigarettes, had a puff at half-time and thought about the nonsense that his manager was drilling into him, probably.
Yeah. The old West Germany I kind of miss. And and interestingly enough, we are actually here to talk about international football a bit, aren't we? In this international week, because the spectre of this US World Cup sort of looming ever closer and is so powerfully tied into developments in US politics now, which seem to come at us all the time with no filter. All this talk about having a 51st state. Well, the rest of the world is already a 51st state of the US. I mean, right now, certainly in terms of its media ingestion. But with the Club World Cup coming as well, we're being forced to confront that relationship between Gianni Infantino as this kind of ducal freedom to lead this game, and somebody who is completely ducal in being above the law in the US president. And am I right in thinking it's above all really grotesque to see this happening and fascinating, and you can't stop watching it?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, we are kind of trundling towards the MAGA World Cup, aren't we? That's what it's. I mean, I wrote a piece in this last week, and someone put to me, it is fairly classic sports washing in that sense. Trump is going to use this to just project his and his administration's own greatness. And there's a funny, like, for all of us, obviously written a lot about Qatar, this entire era. There is a funny thing there as well, in that, like, for a lot of the last decade, say, and especially the last few years, anytime you wrote about any of this, the response was, well, when are you going to write about the US and similar issues? Now, it is different in the sense that the US doesn't need to build an infrastructure on a form of slave labor that is institutionalized. But it is amazing how quickly we've gone from basically, I suppose, under the Biden administration, where it was just this World Cup happening in a liberal democracy with many of its own problems, to now something that is being so quickly and so abruptly being politicized, right up to the obviously, I mean, I suppose what very much signposted this was Infantino gurning there on stage at Trump's inauguration.
Yeah, it's interesting, the relationship between Infantino and Trump, and it kind of predates this.
Yeah.
Trump obviously was there in his first term, and Infantino couldn't stay away from him and his family. And look, he was delighted when Trump won this election. He was so fast out of the blocks. I don't think they'd finished counting the votes when he appeared on Instagram to congratulate Donald Trump. And ever since, we've seen this parade of visits, with the last one perhaps being the strangest, appearing with that enormous new Club World Cup trophy, shiny in gold, made by Tiffany. And for Trump, he gave him a golden key that unlocked it, which Trump, really seemed to like. And he said, "Can you leave this trophy here?" And he has. So now whenever you see Trump in the Oval Office, he's talking about very serious matters, wars. And there's the Club World Cup trophy to his left. It is a remarkable moment, isn't it?
Well, actually, just as a little bit of a tangent, albeit a relevant one, one of my, I don't want to say favourite, but one of the elements that stood out to me about that trip where, so Trump is obviously asked about the trade war, which is another unprecedented element of this we haven't even got into yet. And he talks about how, a bit of tension can be a good thing, as if this is going to be some argument between managers in a press conference. And Infantino, first of all, he's nodding as Trump is saying this. And then he says, yeah. Now, I was talking to people in FIFA about this, because when I had to write a piece about it, one of the responses I got was, basically, I think you have to put that in the context of he's a guest in the White House. It's not necessarily an endorsement of his views. So the president of FIFA nodding and saying yes as Trump is talking and giving this very strong opinion is actually not.
Attention, like it's trying to make the groups of the World Cup more competitive. That's good for the game. But I suppose if you were to look for a legitimate point here, the World Cup is the biggest show on earth. Infantino would say it is very healthy for the competition to have a relationship with the leader. I mean, he certainly thinks so. And there are benefits.
Yeah, he didn't have such a strong relationship with Biden.
Or no relationship with Biden.
Or for that matter.
Well, that's true. But then you look at how far he pushes. I mean, there was the inauguration. Yeah. He turned up basically cosplaying Trump, didn't he? Dressed like him. Or he certainly released an Instagram picture of him. I'm going to dress up like the leader. And, Trump is... these are political leaders. This isn't the emir who's just in power. This is you're endorsing a leader and who has some quite controversial views which actually, in some ways, go against diktats of FIFA in what they, what the end result of these policies is. And he is wholeheartedly throwing his weight behind. He's even pitched a crypto coin in the White House. Does anyone here want to invest in the FIFA coin? And Trump sort of obviously has no idea what this is. Said, that sounds very good. Invest in Gianni's crypto coin. I mean, this is going way beyond any kind of mandate he has to get involved with these leaders.
Yeah, more than that. So to your point, you do need a close relationship with whoever's in charge to get stuff done, because a World Cup can be quite complicated. You're looking at all these states, you're looking at the security element. It's coming very soon, less than 18 months, and a lot of it isn't in place, and it stalled a bit under Biden. But he's run with that and taken it to a place that is just nuts. I mean, you only have to go back to December, where he'd kind of asked Ivanka Trump, Donald Trump's daughter, to take part in the draw for the Club World Cup. Now, there's getting close to the leader. Then there's getting his family involved in pulling Chelsea v Lyon out of a tumbler for the Club World Cup. And the other thing is, look, he's got a job that is in charge of a global organization. FIFA's got these 211 members. If you get that close to one particular guy, someone that polarizing as well, you're creating a lot of risks. So Mexico and Canada, don't forget, are the other co-hosts. This man is slapping tariffs on them and saying he's going to seize Canada, or it should be the 51st state. It puts him in a really awkward position, because he's got to smile and nod along. We're going to take the Panama Canal next week. That was one of the things in the inauguration that he had to kind of be smiling about as well. So what was interesting is Mark Carney just took over as the leader of Canada. Infantino was much slower off the blocks in congratulating and saluting Mark Carney. This was more pro forma, no golden keys, no sort of trophy tour there. And it's strange because Mark Carney and his politics are diametrically opposed to Donald Trump, which is one reason why this party that he leads, the Liberals now, might get to remain in power in Canada because of Gianni Infantino's friend, Donald Trump. So it's a really weird place to find yourself if you're a football leader.
And there's something else you said there that also kind of ties in, I think, with Barney's point about a mandate. I mean, you mentioned how it did slow the preparation for this World Cup under the Biden administration. Well, why is that, actually? That's because there's another unprecedented aspect to this World Cup, which is, for the first time in modern history, there's no local organising committee. FIFA's just taken all of this in-house. So that means more control, more direct access to the city, direct access to the cities where they could be hosting a series of tournaments in future. And so far, the word on the ground now, FIFA, of course, would insist that everything's going well. There's a few issues, but nothing that's insurmountable. Whereas you speak to some people in some of the host cities and they're talking about how FIFA is absolutely loaded at that level. But of course, what did also happen there? And I suppose this is relevant to what FIFA is supposed to be for, what football is supposed to be for. Well, like, again, usually in these situations, the federation is actively involved. So, like, the FA is going to be central to England's joint Euro 2028 hosting. Well, in this, the US Federation have been completely cut out. They're not part of it. Within the federation, they talk themselves about how kind of, we're the host country, but we're not the host federation. The federation itself has to fight for kind of essentially what they're going to get out of this tournament, all to what's likely going to spark a gold rush where all the major European clubs are going to be kind of, and Saudi Arabian clubs potentially, or whoever, are going to be looking at this American market. And then you start to get into the question about, like, I mean, the only reason Infantino's even in this position is because he's voted in by federations like the US one. Like, he's ultimately just supposed to serve them. Whereas, like, what is the role now? It's like he's essentially going around behaving as if there's something like, the Vatican or some, supranational agent. Like, it's the way all of this stuff has been just turned on its head.
But in a way, it's a natural extension of the insanity of the way FIFA is constructed, in that it is both the competition organizer and regulator of it. There's no regulation. There's no one. We will regulate ourselves, which kind of might work when you're this. Well, it didn't really work in the 30s, did it? That's where your whole sports washing kind of started. They were hijacked by dictators then. But it's now such a vast and powerful geopolitical economic entity that nobody has as much unfettered power to do this stuff as Gianni Infantino, as Miguel, I believe you said in the past, an essentially random man who is elected by people who he can cozy up to in order to continue being elected. There's no oversight. And when you're, like you say, you've taken the local organizing committee out of it, it's basically you talking to Trump. And I'm pretty sure that governmental interference at that level in the business of how this tournament is going to be run is not what FIFA is supposed to be doing, and potentially against its own basic aims.
Well, you on that as well, just before Tariq comes in, I mean, the point you made about the regulator, this is something I think actually should be pointed out much more, or something that we should really focus on much more with FIFA. I mean, all this talk in England about the independent football regulator, all this, I mean, really, that should be FIFA's ultimate role. That's all it should be, really.
Regulating.
Well, but as in like all these issues that come up in football, be it ownership, what a club is, the calendar. Like, FIFA should actually be kind of the ultimate adjudicator on this sort of thing. It doesn't define any of that, and it not only does not regulate any of that, it's actually now an active disruptor. So the calendar itself. I did the England game last night, and afterwards Tuchel is talking. Now, I will be saying this is safely outside an embargo, thankfully. Tuchel was talking about how he's got a situation in the summer now where he's got World Cup qualifiers, and he's got an international break. He's got one game on the 7th of June, another game on the 10th or 11th of June, which is a friendly, just the way it falls. And then the Club World Cup starts on the 15th of June. So, like, it was the live question. Well, hang on, which competition has priority here? But they're both ultimately FIFA breaks. It's a World Cup qualification break, and then it's FIFA's own Club World Cup. And like they've got themselves into this mess of their own making. At the same time, players are complaining about it suddenly. Well, we've got to go from these games to just jumping over to the Atlantic for a competition they probably don't really want to play in until they see the amount of money their clubs get and their wages can go up. But yeah, it's just another massive disruption that comes from a body that's supposed to be this. Well, again, yes, the ultimate regulator in the sport.
It's the power, because here you have a situation where they are competitors, market competitors, commercial competitors of the people they're regulating as well. That gives you a huge amount of power, doesn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, in reality, this thing should be broken down into pieces, 3 pieces probably, an event organizing company that does this great football tournament that people like around the world and they can sell for lots of money. And the other one is the stuff you're talking about, the regulation, which is the rules and statutes and all the boring stuff that people don't like, but it's kind of really important. And then the third bit is distributing this money. It's really a charity, isn't it? It's this money, a football charity, I suppose, to all these FAs and wherever this money goes. Unfortunately, all of it's bashed together, and that money is then used politically by whoever's in charge to stay in charge. If you were to organize something that is going to create a corrupt environment, not necessarily corrupt people, because I don't know what, after we know, if they ended up in FIFA, the system is designed to be kind of corrupt, to keep you in power. And if you try and change it, guess what? You're going to lose power.
The only who's the regulator of FIFA? Andrew Jennings and some Swiss prosecutors but you're right. It's just, if you were to make a kind of greenhouse and create the perfect environment for really fecund, detailed, baroque corruption, this would be it. And we were talking earlier about the way that even the nature of that corruption is fascinating, how it changes with the times. And you can almost feel a little bit nostalgic for the kind of Chuck Blazer days. I mean, there is no evidence of corruption, but the way it's run, the way you feel decisions are made, the way it happens behind a curtain is extraordinary, the way soft power is divvied out. And FIFA is now interrupting club football. I find the Club World Cup fascinating. They're basically injecting $1 billion into club football. That Chelsea are going to make 70, 80 million from this competition, which is going to come into the Premier League while they're trying to regulate PSR. That money comes from DAZN, which is part Saudi owned, who are bound up with FIFA, which then gets passed on to Chelsea. There's an incredible cycle of money coming into the league, and Richard Masters and the Premier League cannot be happy about this.
No, they're not. No, hence they're not going to give, and City in particular are quite aggravated about this. They're not giving them an extension to start the season or to delay their start to the season, because as the other Premier League clubs are, but you're not obliged to play in this, and there's a lot of money for it. But as you say,
it's like these boundaries are breaking down. Like this thing is kind of coalescing before our eyes into just a totally random world of currents of finance. The Premier League is not. It's not watertight. It's so hard for it to regulate itself.
It's why I think this year, from the start of the Club World Cup, say, to the end of the US or the United 2026 World Cup, which is really a US World Cup, is going to be yet another one of those watershed moments. A bit like you're talking there about kind of just a different nature. Like, say, it's why the December 2010 World Cup bid was such a key moment. On one side, you've got the FA, fretting about handbags. On the other side, you've got Qatar and Russia doing oil deals to smooth votes. And similarly, I think this is going to be another watershed in that, where I think we're going to start to see the unraveling of actually how football is structured. We're going to go from a league still built on domestic worlds to one now where the major European clubs, the major brands, are going to seek to play more and more of their major games outside their traditional boundaries. And it's going to be like a properly globalized football world in a way I don't think is healthy. And with the irony being that's been driven by an anti-globalist agenda, really.
Well, what's interesting is, does anyone want to watch this stuff that is being proposed as well? Will be interesting. So you can try and say, right, we're going to do all this mad stuff and this is the way it's going to go. But has there been a sense there's an appetite for it from anywhere, that we want all these global competitions, these teams to play each other? I'm not sure there is such a big appetite for that, but
does there need to be an appetite? That's the change. We've seen it in cricket. You don't need to want to watch it or even to like it that much. You just need to be willing to click on it and subscribe to it. Do you like Netflix? No, I don't really. It's not very good. But I'm still always going to subscribe to it. The difference here is that they don't really want the level of loyalty to a club that has sustained football, because that in a way is an obstacle. You don't want season ticket holders. You don't want people who are going to get on the street. You want people who are just willing to pay your subscription fee. The big game changer for football on the back of all this will be a global distribution thing, a global broadcast deal via a streaming that once you start taking that out, the whole thing just becomes a tech company. And all you need is eyeballs and someone who's willing to subscribe it. It's almost as though loving the game to the degree people do is an obstacle.
So then go back a little bit then, and just go to FIFA. Forget all the other bits. What's the point of FIFA then? Because they're the ones driving quite a lot of what you've just described. If the point of FIFA is to protect football and to grow the game, what you've described is something completely different. And it's not a for-profit business. It's a football governing body. What is it doing then?
You know, on exactly that point, Tariq, I was thinking about this when, like, for the first time on Sunday, when I started actually to properly look at how the 2026 World Cup is structured. We were sitting there waiting for Tuchel to come out, and we were talking about how, say, comparing it to 1998, say, when England went through this like long night of the soul in Italy to get to qualify, there was a real sense of achievement. That's not really applicable for big nations anymore because it's so easy. But then you look at what 2026 is, needlessly expanded to 48 teams, and that's basically because the more teams you have, the more voters you get on side, especially given the number of places that have been expanded to Africa and Asia, which inherently isn't a bad thing. It's about what it can potentially be used as and what it also does to the tournament itself. And I feel like so we've got basically 3 weeks of the tournament, which is for the full 48 teams, divided into groups of 4, that gets 16 out. And what's amazing about that is, in Qatar, Infantino started to go on, we've realised how the 4-team groups work so well. We can't possibly get rid of that. But the only reason they work so well is because in a World Cup like that, you've got the cleanness of 2 going through and 2 going out. So you've got this guy essentially making these are purely football decisions now in terms of how capture competition works. And it's just like no understanding of any of it. So exactly to your point about how this serves football, how kind of, it's basically actively ruining the sport. And even they go from this...
It's so confusing. The reason why it's all growth without is, I think if you could sit everyone down and say, why is this happening? That we are seeing a gold rush, and it's a rush to plant your flag in what this game is going to look like.
Yeah.
And I think everybody is interested in developing that global platform, including FIFA. Nobody wants to be left behind. And all of these things, it's like the expanding universe. They're all expanding against each other until something has to kind of pop. And the game is in the middle of this gold rush.
And exactly that. I think this is why Infantino's relationship with Trump is also so important, because it's not just about they're all expanding. I mean, look, UEFA have done this deal with the US agency Relevant, and although Chefron denies it, everyone just looks at that in the context of, well, we're eventually going to have Champions League games in the States. But what is so crucial about this is it gives FIFA first mover advantage. It gives them a land grab, basically, in this, what is exactly that, a gold rush.
Sorry, Tariq, you were just about to say.
You know, it's just really funny that when we had the Qatar World Cup, and we're letting, I think, the clubs off a little bit here.
Yeah.
With all this talk about UEFA and FIFA and all of this, which deserve all of this. But if you remember, we've been doing this so bloody long. After Qatar was given the hosting rights in 2010, there was so much hand-wringing about, you're going to move it to winter. It's not fair on the clubs. The clubs were firing up, and they were so angry. They were angry for years about the Winter World Cup. And then what started to happen was all this money from this tiny Gulf state started pouring into all these European clubs, whether it was TV deals with leagues, whether it was sponsorships on shirts, all this Qatari money came in. So something I found quite surprising, or not surprising in the context of how we've described land grabs and people just growing for the sake of it, is when Saudi Arabia was awarded the 2034 World Cup, which was mental, there was absolute silence from people who were going nuts back in 2010. The same clubs, the same leagues, none of them have publicly said anything. I find that kind of, amazing on the one hand. And then, on the other hand, complete business logic, to use Barney's phrase, there's a gold rush on its way to them. So why should they complain?
Well, I think that's an absolutely massive part of it. But I think the other side of it, which is absolutely connected to that, is when Qatar did it in 2010, it was like this shock, really. Whereas the Saudis have come at it from the other example. All of this is just totally normalized. Suddenly, and look at boxing, say. It isn't suddenly this absurd idea to have a major sporting event or football events in a country that it wouldn't necessarily have been seen as suitable as hosts. It's a part of the game now.
Well, let me just bring it back to FIFA. We've talked about a unhealthily close relationship to a politically divisive leader. We talked about the problems in America. We've talked about this kind of land grab going on in football where the game is being run by people who just basically want to eat it. And everybody is concerned about the way football is being misused in a country, America, that a lot of people no longer trust or feel comfortable with. How do we feel about, just as a last question, we have to go there and cover this. And as you know, people will say to you, well, if you don't like it, why are you going to Trump's World Cup? As they said with Qatar. Now, I know what my feelings about that. What do you think?
Well, actually, because Tariq is the same here, actually, and actually you're as well, Barney. You get this all the time, why are you covering it? You're all going on a jolly. Well, I mean, it's actually not a jolly. Actually, I know it sounds kind of like the smallest violin stuff. They're actually quite grueling to do. But anyway, that's beside the point. In the case of Qatar, I think, and even on a lower scale, something like this, it's absolutely crucial journalists actually go and cover the reality of these things, because the point of journalism isn't to boycott. It's to report. Otherwise, falsehoods are spread, PR is spread. There's nothing challenged. I mean, that is the bottom line here. And okay, people can have fair debates about, whether you should actually be kind of reporting on the football and that, because that legitimizes it. But that's part of the story. And there's plenty of examples of history that show that. As regards to covering it, I have to say, as regards, the idea of going and all that, the one thing that's suddenly on my mind a lot, that, to be fair, wasn't with Qatar, isn't at the moment with potentially going to Saudi Arabia in 2034, but is this issue that, well, we're suddenly seeing all these stories about green cards getting revoked or visas not being given to critical people. I mean, is that going to be an issue now for journalists who've been speaking about Trump's America in the way we've just been speaking about it?
Yeah.
So you're saying you're happy to go there and endorse President Trump's World Cup and amplify his message, even though it's slightly grueling for you?
Well, I would say it's to report on the reality of the MAGA World Cup and everything it entails.
Yes, it is an insane idea that the answer to this is to have no freedom of speech. Only people who agree with the regime should go there, because then what is the point? You can't no-platform football. It's still there.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, which always a massive side to that. The whole idea of boycotting him might actually stand true, or if, say, it wasn't being broadcast and watched by 3 billion people across the planet. But it's an insanity, that idea.
Sorry, Tariq, I interrupted you there when you were about to speak.
Yeah, no, I think, as Miguel said, it's interesting, isn't it? That's why we report on stuff. It's basic as that, isn't it? This is a crazy story, and our job is to cover this stuff. And the World Cup is the biggest sporting event in the world. If you're a sports reporter, this is what people expect you to do. But in terms of how you cover it, it's probably a bit more interesting from our point of view, isn't it? Like, this is a country that everyone seems to know, obviously, really well. It's not Qatar. Remember, again, the name Qatar came out of an envelope. People thought it's a sound that you make from the back of your throat. No one had heard of this place, but people who work in geopolitics. So that has a whole different story. This is the United States of America, massive story. From my perspective, I work for a newspaper in America, so how we're going to cover it is going to be very different to how we would have covered a foreign World Cup. And of course, that brings its own challenges. And the issue of right now, immigration and visas is huge. It is a way, a tool, the World Cup might be, to frame this bigger story about what's happening in America. People who wouldn't normally read US politics stories might think, I'll read about this because I go to the World Cup. I know the World Cup, and you get to tell this story. This issue with the immigration, especially, it's going to be people like you, Barney, which is weird because normally it's people like me that get stopped at borders and in airports. Now it's all of us, which is kind of interesting. We've had situations here in the last couple of weeks where a German tourist has been put in detention for, I think, 45 days on a tourist visa to basically cross into the US. You've got English tourists, British tourists also. These are things that are unheard of happening in the US, and they're happening right now. In the context of the World Cup, you have that. Now add Iran, maybe, I don't know, other Middle Eastern countries who are supposed to go and play in this football tournament. This is a crazy and extremely interesting moment, isn't it?
So you're describing a process that's kind of the opposite to sports washing. It's using this platform, use the tannoy, piggyback this big messaging thing of football to actually highlight issues that wouldn't otherwise be seen. I guess that's one way of describing what we're doing. What's the opposite of washing? Making something
sullying.
Sports sullying. Yes, we're sports sulliers.
But then I suppose we're supposed to get into the discussions about the actual nature of sports washing in that sense. In that, in your classic form, or the new classic form of outright autocratic states doing it, they don't really care about PR, do they? Because the point is normalization. Exactly what we're talking about has happened with Saudi Arabia. Whereas with a liberal democracy, I do wonder whether the opposite can actually happen then. Because suddenly it's exactly that. Because suddenly I suppose the idea is they are... given the debate about America now, and so much talk about its direction, that this actually, the World Cup is going to serve to suddenly highlight more of these issues. I mean, what about kind of how many fans can go, or what fans are going to be given visas, all this sort of stuff.
It's good to hear you bringing it back to the fans. That's classy. So I think what we've decided here is that it's a complex, unresolvable, grotesque, top-down, dictator-led, kind of total confusion where all these worlds are bleeding into each other, but that it's very important to try and stare at this thing and tell the truth about it as best you can. Does that sound a bit glib? Is it even possible? I mean, you have to keep trying to understand what's happening here.
Yeah, essentially. I mean, from our perspective, that is all you can do is basically, write the reality or the reality as best we can. And, people too often talk about, what minds are actually changing? What are you actually changing? Well, that's not the point. It's about recording what is happening because that alone is of value. And let's not forget as well, we're not just talking about events now that have a historic significance in a sporting sense. We're actually talking about events that have a historic significance, especially how crucial they are to the trajectory of a lot of these states or a lot of these rulers.
I read George Orwell's review of Mein Kampf the other day. He did a book review of it when it came out. And I was sort of thinking, I wonder if people were objecting at the time, this is just going to help Adolf Hitler sell more copies of Mein Kampf. Like, Orwell, you should... But luckily, he got it right. History could have judged you really badly there. At one point, he says he really likes Adolf Hitler, but because he likes his beaten down, victimized face. I think this was before Hitler went full bunker and screaming. He had this incredible air of victimhood about him. But Orwell gets Hitler right and says there is something absolutely crushing and moronic and awful about the world he describes, where people are just struggling to defeat each other constantly and in a constant state of war. And he essentially says that Hitler needs to be killed. And I am glad that, I'm not in any way comparing any of us to George Orwell, but I am glad that he didn't know platform reviewing Mein Kampf, because it's a vital document, and he also read it right. So there you go.
So, on from one American-owned superpower or something like that to Liverpool. And, on from whether something is morally good to whether something is good in a quality sense. are Liverpool going to be good champions? Are they a good team? What sort of achievement is this? Because it's something that's kind of been bubbling away in the background of their surge to the title, especially as they've gone out of the FA Cup, lost the League Cup final, and gone out of the Champions League. And now, right now, it almost seems like this just more muted feeling about what is actually a moment of English history, which is England's most successful ever club, matching Manchester United's record number of titles at 20. And yet, here we are, having this discussion.
Yeah, it's strange, isn't it? I think it's probably one of the more misunderstood title-winning seasons. I've never known a point like this where it's necessary to suddenly judge mid-season whether this is objectively good or not. It's strange. I think it's to do with where football is, where club football is, to do with the standards that have been set in previous seasons, where we had Manchester City either winning the league or driving their nearest rivals onto some quite extraordinary points totals. I think it's slightly unfair as well. I think the way to see Liverpool's season is as the end of the Klopp era. I really feel like it's the introduction of Arne Slot. If Klopp was still there, we wouldn't be having this discussion. We'd be talking about what a wonderful manager Klopp is and how... I mean, I feel Liverpool are the right team. As totally objective, I have no fan attachment at all. The era has been those two teams chiefly pushing each other quite hard in the league. And the year that Man City collapses, it makes sense to me that Klopp's Liverpool should mop up another title. But the Slot era starts next year for me. I mean, we know it's out in public now, the thing that we've known for a while, that Trent Alexander-Arnold is going to leave. Van Dijk and Salah, both their contracts are out. We don't know what's going to happen there, but I suspect one of them at least will leave. They're both quite old now. And yeah, players come and go, but these are three really exceptional players who are kind of the absolute pegs of that team. Alexander-Arnold is probably is the best homegrown Liverpool player since the 80s, isn't he? Since Phil Thompson. And he's been absolutely key to that era. Van Dijk and Salah are the transformational signings. And that all starts again next season. That's going to be... Slot's got a clear summer. This is essentially the dead hand of Jurgen Klopp and of a team that he built. And it's kind of a bonus title at the end of that reign, as far as I'm concerned. And I'm glad for it. I love that team. I thought it was fascinating to watch. I love the early years particularly. And to sort of denigrate a title for that team seems weird to me. They are a really good team. He's done some sort of tweaks that the wheels are slightly coming off with a bit, like is Ryan Gravenberch really ready to be a really top central midfielder in a title-winning team? Don't know. He looked like it for a while. They're going to get over the line, and then there'll be a kind of step change over the summer. But this, I think, should be seen as the end of one era rather than the beginning of one.
That should be okay, shouldn't it? Like, not winning everything is how sport or football might have been in the past. Like, there wasn't a team that kept winning or in the final of absolutely every competition it played in until it's quite a recent development, isn't it? So winning the Premier League, especially winning this Premier League, where there are really good teams in it. All of the teams have some of the best players in the world in them. The Premier League is really in its own class globally. If you win that thing, you're bound to be pretty good. But if you come second, you're bound to be good as well. It's the standards that Man City, I suppose, have set for everyone to expect. And if you look at what's happened to Liverpool in the recent times, they've been eliminated from the Champions League, having won that new group stage, but somehow being paired with possibly the team that will go on and win the competition. Now, if they got, say, Bruges and beat Bruges, would we be having this conversation because they lost to Newcastle in the League Cup? It's just a moment in time, isn't it? And I guess the style, how much of it is to do with the style as well? It's not swashbuckling, it's not Klopp football in the way that I suppose people are used to. They have got the job done. Is that not okay for people these days, that you have to win it the right way?
Well, I think more interesting there is actually you just touched on something about kind of like it used to be that teams didn't win everything, because I think there's a very definitive historical context here. tied to a lot of the stuff we've been talking about elsewhere, where right up until before 2008, only one team in one of the 5 major leagues had done an actual treble. That was Man United in '99, and it was considered kind of a miracle of sport for all sorts of reasons. But otherwise, been done by Celtic, PSV, Ajax. But of course, what happens in 2008? Well, you've had almost a decade then of Champions League prize money. And remember, previous to that, there was an era actually where the Champions League winners were often teams like Benitez, Liverpool, who finished 5th, Milan, who were often 3rd and 4th. It was almost like a team would win the league and then someone slightly below them would win the Champions League. But by about 2008, and again, this is after 5 years of Abramovich, it's the year Abu Dhabi by Manchester City. Suddenly, I think the era of super clubs is created, where a certain strand of clubs has the finances to create massively strong squads. And that is marked, of course, by the first of that era, Guardiola's Barcelona, who immediately win a treble. 6 years later, Barcelona win another treble. Inter do one, Bayern do one, City do 2 different trebles. And because I think we get more and more concentration of resources. And I think what that does then, I think that what feeds into some of the discussion about Liverpool is there's almost that sense if a super club team in that era gets it right, then you're not maximizing it by doing all these things that a lot of your contemporaries have done. Say, I think that is a big part of it, because I mean, if you look at even say what the most dominant team before this era, Ferguson's United, there was a lot of years where Fergie would just basically kind of reel off a league title. It wasn't seen as one that was big in the grander scheme of things, like 96, 97 or 2010, 11, but it's still part of the legacy and the heritage of the club. But I think that's a massive part of it, just that sense that if you get it right, you should be capable of doing more, and it's almost wasting it if you don't.
Do you think also maybe it's a slightly self-sustaining discussion, as in a discussion that exists because we have to have a discussion? Like, there is so much attention paid now. I mean, you can only play a game every 3 or 4 days, but there has to be constant analysis, takes, retakes. We have to analyse this thing. And if a team is simply cruising towards the league title, as Liverpool are, playing a really good, measured, all-round game that means you're going to beat a lot of teams, even if they're doing that in a really strong league, we have to analyse it. We have to dice it up and have a view on it. And so it becomes necessary to denigrate it, because what can you do? You can't constantly call it good. And I mean, chuck into the fact that before you actually, all the things that we hold up as having been fantastic and great, God, the standard was high, we just didn't watch them as much. Like, there were dead periods in every great team, like terrible games, awful bungled results, period where they lost. That's what happened with, if you go right back to Liverpool, Man United, Leeds United, all of these teams, they weren't superlative all the time. Yeah. But we now come to expect that, partly because, as you say, there have been some super clubs who can sustain that level. But if watch the great Real Madrid teams of the last 10, 15 years. They have some real stinkers along the way. Yeah. But we just kind of tend to remember the clipped up bits.
But I think it does come back to this issue of concentration. Because exactly what you're talking about. Say, like in the 90s, you could win the league with 75 points. Now, if you're winning the league by 75 points, that means you have some bad runs, because just there's a much greater margin for error. And again, like you think of that, I mentioned the 96-97 season with United. They had a 3-game run where they get they had beaten 6-3 by Southampton, 5-0 by Newcastle, and then 2-1 by Chelsea. And a really bad game, and they were massively in crisis. Lose the European home record to Fenerbahce, and when something like that happens these days, it's basically taken, which has partly happened to Guardiola this season. It's almost taken as like just this unprecedented crisis that shouldn't be possible in the modern game, because that's sort of true. Whereas it used to be a relative normality even for champions.
But do you think part of the problem is also the way teams play and what players are now? I mean, I do really think that there are fewer. I think we're really spoiled by Messi and Ronaldo, and by lots of very expressive, skillful players who came through in that era. I don't know if there are exhilarating footballers in these teams now. Who are the most exhilarating footballers in the Premier League? It's why people get so excited about Cole Palmer, and he's described as a maverick. He's not really a maverick, but he just looks and moves slightly differently and has slightly different angles about him. I think, in a way, even that Man United team that would lose quite a few games en route to winning a treble, There were players in there who would do extraordinary things on a muddy pitch in a slightly drab game, and that's what you would remember. Ryan Giggs's incredible goal, or Cantona doing something before that. I think the game has closer emotional peaks now. You're often just really watching this quite steady product of possession.
Yeah.
And I think the feeling that I'm not watching something that is entertaining me enough might be part of that, or shocking me or startling me, because that's not how the game is now.
It's not loose. There's not a random thing's not going to happen, isn't it? It's all quite, everything's drilled in. There are tactical approaches that, like, where is JJ or Kocha or whoever to do something silly or something amazing? This kind of, maybe this lack of surprise is part of the issue. And then, of course, just to go back on the Man City thing, I mean, we by the time this pod comes out, or the next week or whenever, this enormous thing is going to happen. There's going to be a ruling in this case where we're going to know if a team that has been incredibly dominant has effectively cheated for a decade. And that puts a whole different spin on everyone's achievement and what we've been watching, I suppose, in some way. And I don't know, set Liverpool up against all of that. You know, did you want a closer title race maybe? Being 16 points or 13 points clear might not be entertaining enough for people. In the past, these two teams were going neck and neck, and City, with their resources, would eventually win the title. And, you know, this is just a bit different.
It's weird because the league is strong and entertaining if you're not thinking about the title race. Like, I think PSR is a really good thing in lots of ways, in that it's created this mid-tier of teams, together with some managers and a way of playing, which is, you know, teams have decided, well, we're going to try and attack to win in this league. We'll win enough games, score enough goals if we go forward. And I think the league's really, perversely, really quite good this year. If you just go on a number of games and am I entertained by this? Was that good? Does this team play good football? It's only really the title race and the relegation spots which create this weird feeling of stasis. There are so many weird mini leagues within it, stratified by finance. The product is really good. It's like a really good fine cheese in the middle. And then at the top and the bottom, there are these things that don't really work as a robust competitive thing. You could just slice them off and keep the cheese, and the cheese is pretty good.
Well, actually, we should, I think I would say, still stress at the end. I think Liverpool have been pretty excellent this season. They're a really good side. Slot is all. I mean, some of this discussion is ultimately anchored in the idea of, you know, where in football history Guardiola's positional game is and how systemized it is. I think Slot has evolved that at the exact same time as maybe there are a few kind of more divergences from that. We've spoken about Bournemouth, Iriola, and ultimately also, like, and this is part of management. He's kept all his best players on the pitch for most of the key games, where that hasn't been the case for some of his rivals.
And it might just be an off year for the top of the cheese not to be as tasty as the middle, because I think next year the top part of the cheese will be quite good as well. We're going to have a better championship race, maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah. Liverpool's, though, for all that, they are a really good team. They're hugely reliant on Salah's goals and assists.
Yeah.
And hugely reliant on Van Dijk as well. And for me, I mean, Salah's an odd player in that I think he is the most effective player in Europe. But he's got there by paring his game back and just being incredibly effective in those moments, winning games. And it's been quite masterful of Slot, the way he's harnessed that. I feel he's encouraged him to do that. He knows that he will have moments to decide games. And he's played every game, but he's within those games, he's kind of not playing every single minute at his highest intensity. And I think that's a really brilliant piece of management. It's very confident. And it makes me think he will be able to build another team, but that we're not going to see that until after the summer. And that will be fascinating.
Yeah. Well, I mean, he did. In the summer, he had his own ideas in replacing the entire attack. Let's not forget, Liverpool were initially going very big on Anthony Gordon. So, I mean, I think he knew there was work to be done, but obviously he's part of Slot's impressive management here has actually been adapting to Klopp's. Let's not forget, for all, I think Barney's right. This is the end of the Klopp era. I think he does play a very different way to Klopp, and it's not easy to get a team to adapt from one to the other in one season and go and win the title.
Also, those players too obviously have credit. This is, you know how old you are, you know it's coming to the end of the cycle. The fact they've got themselves up all together to try and win this thing, I think, is worth celebrating for them and whoever supports them. I think it's not always likely the case that when Klopp left, that could have been the end for all of them, and they're thinking of their move. They have really put in the effort this year, which doesn't always happen.
Yeah.
So league strong, Liverpool good. Just that gap has taken away, I guess, what broadcasters crave, which is, narrative drama right to the end. But you can't really start to criticise Liverpool for that. They've been the best team in the league by an absolute distance, haven't they? And some of the games have been thrilling. I mean, the Brentford game where they came back to win it with Darwin Núñez, that was a title-winning game. I don't think this team doesn't deserve to win the league. I thought it was brilliant. It's just nobody's been able to follow them.
Yeah. It's actually quite an old-fashioned title win in that one.
So, we had a 4-hour marathon sporting session this week, didn't we, at the SJA Awards. Interesting for the award winners, but also what it said about journalism.
Yeah, it was an interesting industry moment. I found it fascinating to see you saw in a visual form the divide in the way this sport is consumed. On the one hand, some very intense, old school newspaper types going up to get their awards, sort of ghettoized into their little segments. And then on the other side, the awards have been massively expanded. It was full of YouTubers, content creators, people who are essentially not doing journalism, but creating the kind of noise around football and doing the same thing. But who are there because they're rightly there because they have huge audiences and are very popular and are how many younger people perhaps consume this. And they brought a really different lineage to it. You could see very clearly legacy and kind of new media in the same room. And it was fascinating to watch.
Yeah, I mean, the question you raised, I thought they could have been almost two different award ceremonies. There's like content. Is that content? Is it journalism? I don't know. It is hugely popular. You're looking at the numbers for a lot of these things. Massive on YouTube. In fact, half the awards were about who's doing what on YouTube, and it tells you the direction of travel. But Miguel, you've come across this stuff probably in your time at games. The guys standing outside various stadiums are hugely popular now. What do you make of it? Are they doing the same work?
Well, it's the audience, isn't it? Exactly. I mean, it's funny that to go back to some of the themes we've been talking about. 4 years ago we had the Super League and Perez going on with the young generation. Well, this is where a lot of that generation is actually currently accessed. Now, it doesn't mean that kind of tastes stay the same, but there is certainly... you look at some of the numbers of some of the kind of the biggest football YouTube shows, and they are massive. And some of the followings these guys have. And even though some individual journalists who have seen that and started to basically... It's a bit like almost an analog to when Twitter first started and football journalists would generate these huge followings. Well, now it feels like we're on to the next stage of that, where individual voices on football, and it doesn't necessarily have to be journalism, can suddenly generate this mass audience through that, because it's a different route. I think it probably feeds into evolving habits, this kind of almost Instagramization where people aren't necessarily reading news but consuming it in kind of bite-sized chunks, and that can obviously go into kind of wider formats. And then you've got the other side of that, of course, where... Sorry.
It's hard to tell what's good, though, isn't it? When I look at this stuff, is this good? I don't know. I can see if it's popular, and some of the people on YouTube I think are really good and they seem to know a lot and analyze the game really well and sort of become. They're sort of doing journalism, having entered it from a point of shouting about a club, wanting to attract fans. You then find that, for example, Flex is actually a really good analyst of the game. He seems to have really good contacts and knows stuff. And I really like him. I'm not sure. I'm saying he came in to do that, but he's on the same stage as people who I would see as just sort of providing noise.
But there's a classic thing there as well, which I suppose, and this is one of the kind of more organic aspects of journalism that, people within journalism probably like to kind of not broadcast as much, but almost kind of if someone has a voice, so basically, if someone with a massive following, like I'm thinking from the perspective of a massive club, say, if someone with a huge audience is saying things about their club, well, then people who are being spoken about are naturally going to go to them and try and either A, angle what they say, or B, give them information, which is pretty much what journalism is. Okay, then you can get onto the next stage of discussion, which is how that information is filtered, how it's used, and then it's a much more kind of specifically journalist discussion. But ultimately, it's still kind of, there's this blurring of lines, basesically. And I know like, a lot of the YouTube lines...
I think the word you're looking for is influence, isn't it?
Well, yeah,
really?
Yeah.
You know, and I was talking to someone from one of the clubs as well. The industry is changing. These people are massively important as messengers for clubs. We are, in a traditional sense, likely to be increasingly sidelined because in some ways we can't be trusted to deliver the message. Whereas these guys are...
You ask questions. They don't want questions. They want amplification. So are people like us finished?
I honestly, I think in one sense in terms of needing the traditional media to get a message across of some kind, I think a lot of that is now over. And I'll just hop to Saudi Arabia very quickly and say the Saudis, for their sports projects, they've got a policy now of sidelining traditional media and going straight to the influencers. And you know, paying their transport, paying their travel, and they get their message across. And weirdly, the crossover is here. Some of those influencers, who the Saudis pay for, are appearing in papers that we would also recognize, so that there is a real blurring of boundaries here, and I think that's the direction of travel.
Romano advertising Club World Cup tickets. Look forward to his next searing analysis of FIFA.
Yes.
Talks about the corruption.
Yes.
I think the question was, are people like us finished? Well, I think these particular people are now finished.
Well, let's see how this podcast does.
All right. Thanks, everyone.